Hello and welcome back to the Solo RolePlayers Podcast. I have for you today another interview with one of the content creators that got me into the hobby, and I bring it to you not without a little bit of irony, and that is because our guest today, John from Tale of the Manticore, one of the main reasons he was inspirational and his work was inspirational for me to start doing what I'm doing on A Wasteland Story is that the audio and production quality is just so high and fantastic in his show, and that was inspirational to me. And the reason it's not without irony is that when we recorded this interview a little while back now, we had some technical issues. I take partial responsibility for that. I should have picked up that it was going to be a bigger problem than I thought earlier and fixed it before we did the interview. Unfortunately, however, it still has some problems, but rest assured, the quality of John's audio on this episode is not at all representative of the quality of the audio on his show, Tale of the Manticore. So I do hope you listen. I did consider whether we would redo the interview, but it was such an interesting interview and we talked about such great stuff that I didn't want to try and recreate that, and I didn't want to miss out on all the great stuff that he said here. So I hope you enjoy it. I think you probably get used to it. And yeah, here's the interview. Welcome back to the Solo RolePlayers Podcast. I'm your host, PJ, and today on the show I have another of the content creators out there who was one of the people who was inspirational to me to get started to do my own thing. From Tale of a Manticore, welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. Really been enjoying your show over the past couple of weeks. Both the interview show and the Wasteland Story, both really good.
Oh, that's really lovely to hear. Now, you told me when we were organizing this time to record, you said that you like to, and by the way, thank you for coming on a Sunday of all days.
My pleasure.
But you said that you usually like to record some dialogue stuff in the morning. What were you recording?
Probably why my voice is a bit scrappy right now. My methodology for the show. Should I explain what the show is, or
please do?
Or is that
I was going to ask you that, but you might as well dive straight into it. I'm so bad
at the elevator pitch. I've done it. I should just have it written on my wall because I always really mess it up. Basically, it's a mashup between an actual play where somebody sort of games into the microphone. You know, they hit record and they just game into the microphone. I mash that with an audio drama. So you kind of get a segment of narrated story in past tense, third person with music and sound effects, and then the focus shifts into sort of a game side, and I become a solo RPG player, and then it just kind of ping pongs back and forth between those two states. And the result is an emergent story that I don't know what's happening next as I'm writing it, and as a creator, it's like super exciting. When I launched it, it felt very, very experimental, but luckily it has found a home, and I get to keep doing it.
Yeah, well, I managed to miss you for a long time somehow. I mean, I'm pretty new. I've been sort of lurking around the solo role playing stuff for a little while, but not more than, I guess, 6 or 12 months, something like that. And as I was just explaining to you in the green room before, but when I decided to try my thing, I wanted to gauge a little bit of what was out there, you know, and certainly when it comes to things like audio quality and production quality, because a lot of the stuff that I'd heard was, you know, like you say, hit record and just sort of play. And that's cool. I really like that.
It's fine. Yeah, there's some good ones. Yeah.
But for me, in my background, which is in audio, I thought, well, I want to do something that has a bit more production values, and I wanted to see what was out there. And so it was coming across yours. I think I might have put out a question in Reddit or something saying, you know, what's a high quality thing that I can check out? And I came across yours and listened to the first, I mean, really, I was excited and jumping around. I listened to the first few minutes of the first episode and thought, okay, great, here's a baseline. And yeah, this is sort of what I want to aim for, you know, that sort of level of quality.
I started 4 years ago, and now when I think back to those first episodes, which as a podcaster, your first episodes are like your front door, right? They're the first thing everyone sees. A lot of people, they want to start at the beginning. But of course, I didn't know what I was doing when I started, and my front door, from my perspective, is a very ugly front door. And boy, I wish I could go back and approach that with the skill set that I have now, and even the comfort level that I have now, and the knowing what I'm doingness of that I've got now, and recreate that front door. Because for me, those first episodes are, well, they've got some growing pains. We'll put it like that. I was experimenting with a kind of, the shadow nose kind of voice that eventually I just dropped because I guess I became more comfortable in my own skin. But at the time, I was going for almost a persona for the narrator, like a kind of a dark, grimdark narrator.
Which you do very well, by the way.
No, thank you. I listen to it now and I'm like, dude, why didn't you just speak into the mic? Anyway, so we were saying, what was I doing this morning with recording? Part of my methodology is to get up, and while my voice still has some bass in it, because typically by about 11 o'clock in the morning, the bass is gone, and the sort of that tone is unattainable. So I found, just really trial and error, I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, that I get my best results and also my most consistent results, because that's a thing that happens to be, well, it's a thing. It turns out I didn't know that either. But your voice sounds different during different parts of the day. So if I can find some consistency and find the best time of day to record, that's when I do it. So this morning I got up early and I just read some script. So I don't know if you do it this way, but I create a script. Like the game and the writing of the script, like the gameplay and the writing of the script is the same thing. That's all one thing. I just sit down and type as fast as I can, trying to keep up with my thoughts. And when I need dice, I just stop and I grab dice and I roll them, and whatever the results are, kind of interpret them, and then continue writing the script. And then step 2 is to read all of that and edit as I go.
That's a big skill. To edit as you go makes a huge difference.
Oh, the editing, it's funny. I used to spend about 20 hours per episode in production, and then I got better at it, because you get better at things. And I found that I wasn't spending less time. I was just becoming more and more, probably compulsive is the word, like obsessive. And I would go in and I would try and razor out all of the, tonsil clicks that you can get. I've got that same microphone you do, that SM7B, and it's a great microphone, but boy, does it like to pick up mouth sounds and stuff. So I go through that and I try and get rid of them or do like retakes and stuff like that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to come back just a little bit there. I mean, I could talk about editing techniques and mic stuff all the time. I may even have some tips for you that I came across in my work when I was doing really hours and hours and hours and hours of audio stuff.
Right.
Really, and especially using Reaper, as you said just before when we were talking off mic, you do too. I have some cool tools and solutions for that stuff. We can maybe talk about that later. Less interesting to your standard role-playing audience, perhaps. But yeah,
you may have a point.
But tell me, like you said, when you started out, it was you were new to it, you didn't know what you were doing, and then you got better as you do. I mean, that's this great thing about life, right? What's your background when it comes to? Do you have background with audio or music or something like that? Tell us a bit about that first.
Yeah, so maybe quite similar to you. I was so right now I'm a high school teacher. Actually, I'm a sort of a retired high school teacher that they keep pulling me back into the school because there's this big labor shortage in Canada and they can't find people. But I'm supposed to be retired, but I work every day anyway. Before I was a teacher, I did a couple of different things. I worked in like music licensing in an office. And before I did that, I was like a touring musician with RCA Records, which is, I think it's owned by Bertelsmann, BMG. And so I was a touring bass player in a like rock and metal band. And that lasted for a few years, and as these kinds of careers do, it went zoomed up and then it crashed down, all in the space of about, professionally, about 3 years. But I learned some stuff while I was doing that and got an interest in audio engineering and musicianship and all that stuff. And so that was part of the skill set that I kind of just hung on to, even after that career was done. And I was, now I'm a teacher and a hobbyist musician and a hobbyist recording engineer and stuff like that. And so when I got into solo role-playing and decided to make a podcast, I thought, well, actually, my first thought was, I'm not going to make one. I'm just going to find a bunch of good ones and listen to those, because I found this thing that I think is awesome. I want to listen to lots of that. But eventually, I realized I have all of the tools to be making one, and it was kind of like if not me, then who? Like, I've got microphones, I've got recording equipment, I know how to use it more or less. And so, that was one of the reasons I kind of got into podcasting instead of, say, YouTubing, which, was that a good idea? How do you feel about it? YouTubing seems to have the much higher profile.
Yeah, but there's something, purer and higher lit about just audio, I think,
Yes, I agree. I love the medium. Like, I love working with audio, and I love the podcast that I listen to. You almost form that parasocial relationship with the narrator or the game player, where you kind of feel like you know them a little bit. But they become like that voice in your ear becomes a part of your life in a way that doesn't really happen with YouTube. I enjoy a lot of YouTube creators and stuff, but the podcast stuff, I just love the medium. It's so much fun.
And I think there is potential for higher production quality, but with less, less equipment. I don't know what it is, but like to properly have a studio where you can light everything and you can do edits and stuff like that on video, I think it's kind of a bit antithetical to YouTube as a medium, like having high production quality stuff somehow, whereas audio, it works really well.
Right.
We have audio books, which are generally really high quality, radio players, that kind of thing. The whole history of it is, and I think that's part of what drew me to it as well, and that level of quality. But tell me, you said you discovered then solo RPGing and thought, wow, this is awesome. What can I do with it? And I'm also a big proponent of do the thing that you want to see, which is what I was doing as well, and what I've done typically in my career, in my life. Tell me, what was your journey to solo role playing? Was it via role playing? Was it via some other avenue? How did you get there?
It was a real mistake. Like, it was a mistake. And I regret every tedious minute. It was accidental. We'll say it was accidental. And I said before, and I will probably always say that if you had asked me 5 years ago if solo role-playing was a thing that might be a part of my life, I would have said, like, absolutely not, and that couldn't possibly even work. And by the way, it's a little bit sad. That's what I would have said. I would have been dead wrong, but I would have believed that 100%. But now I see the light, and I've joined the cult of solo role playing. The way it worked for me was I had gotten completely out of role playing games for decades. I'm one of these sort of air quotes deep freeze guys. Around 18, 19 years old, I was finally had enough of the D&D stigma, and thought, I can't be a cool metal musician and play D&D, because back then you couldn't. It was social death to be into RPGs. Just the worst. And so I just abandoned it. You win. I give up. And I just sort of, I played video games and read books and watched the Lord of the Rings movies, and then Game of Thrones, and I kind of get that fix in a different way. And then COVID came, which for all of the terribleness that it brought into the world, it also created a lot of art. And it's because a bunch of us suddenly had like free time on our hands. And so as a teacher at that time, I got sent home, and here I am just sort of in my studio, surrounded by gear and guitars and microphones. And I was bored, and I thought I should get back into role playing somehow. Because
why not?
At least, yeah, because I've got the time, and I'm sitting here anyway, and all we do is Zoom calls in the COVID era anyway. So why not start getting back into role playing games? And I discovered a podcast called The Iron Realm. I think it's like 8 or 9 years old. I think thereabouts. And it's a guy named Abel Enzo, and he put out this podcast. I don't know how I found it. It was a real stumble upon, right? I have no idea how I found it. But when I did find it, it was like, this is lightning in a bottle, because it felt like the games I played when I was a child. He was using like a version of BX, and it felt very classic and super nostalgic. And he was doing this thing where he was playing a solo game as a podcast, and I'd never heard of anything like that before, and it really worked. And his thing was, he had created Play by Podcast. That was kind of his offering to the world. The world's first Play by Podcast. And you would kind of attach your fate to one of the characters and follow it along. And I never really did that part. I just enjoyed the podcast as it was. And at some point along the way, he started to write these little audio drama vignettes to intersperse through intersperse.
Either works.
I'm actually an English teacher.
Oh, good.
Anyway, insert word there. He put these things, he would sprinkle them throughout his show, and I found them super, super effective. And that's really when the lockdown came, and I thought, I'm going to find a million podcasts just like this one. I'll spend all my time listening to podcasts. It's going to be amazing. But I couldn't find a single other one. Nobody was doing what he was doing. And that was the kernel for me. I'm like, what if I did that? I've got microphones, I've got recording equipment, I've certainly got time on my hands, and I definitely have the interest. Why don't I sort of do what the Iron Realm is doing, but I'll take all of the stuff that I love, like these sprinkled audio drama vignettes, and I'll blow them up as big and dramatic and as touching as I possibly can. And then I'll minimize the stuff that wasn't working for me. For example, I wasn't doing the play-by podcast, and so, okay, I'll cut that out. And so the idea, as far as I can tell, for what I call semi-actual play, this kind of a little bit of actual play talk and a little bit of audio drama, I think he's the guy that invented it. Yeah, I think he really is the semi-actual playist. And I don't even know if he intended to do that, because I really think he was trying to push this play-by podcast idea. But along the way, he created what I think is almost a whole new mode for people who do what you and I do. This new option, it doesn't have to just be an audio drama, and it doesn't have to just be an actual play. There's something that is in the middle of those two things. And for my money, it is absolutely the most exciting way to consume and create stories, because you know that there's no plot armor, and you know that the author, like when I listen to your show, you can feel like you don't know what's happening next, and that's what makes it so exciting, because the characters are extremely vulnerable to like the whims of the dice and your interpretation of them, and there's no end scene that's planned out, where the author is just taking us there, and at the end they're going to give us some zinger. Oh, do you remember the device that Saskaid found in episode 7? Well, you forgot, but I didn't, and she pulls it out of her back pocket and saves the day. Like that kind of gotcha ending, which is really common, I think, for traditional fiction. Like we don't do that because we don't know where it's going, and I feel like that is the big strength for what you and I are doing, and that's why I still am totally engaged in creating content. Like, I do it every day. I love it.
That's a really interesting point that you made there, and something that I found out quite early on in my experiment as well. You said this was an experiment for you starting out. It was exactly the same feeling for me.
Absolutely.
And I had one mate I showed the first, like the pilot episode to, before I decided that I would actually put it out into the world and see what happened, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I picked him because he's he's a very thoughtful guy. He's an audio engineer. He's a musician. He's never played a role-playing game. Mm-hmm. He doesn't play board games. He doesn't really play video games, you know. And so I thought that'd be a really interesting person to show this to, because I know that...
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I assumed that our audience our demographic is going to be people who are interested in solo role-playing or just role-playing in general, that kind of thing. And I thought it'd be really interesting to get this guy's perspective. And when he came back after the first episode and he said, that was really weird, you know. But by the end of it, I started getting really excited every time you rolled the dice.
Nice. And
I really want to find out what happens, you know. And coming from someone who doesn't have that experience about RPGs or games in general, that was sort of a little thing, a little tick for me where I thought, okay, this actually could be something interesting, you know.
Right. And you're drawing, part of your audience, I assume, is being drawn by Fallout, right? I think you mentioned like the TV show being out there and being good. Actually, I haven't seen it, but everybody seems to say it's quite good. So that might be bringing you an audience that is a non-gaming audience.
Yeah,
that's really
I don't
interesting.
know how much of the audience. I haven't had anyone reach out to me yet who is a non-gaming audience, but I think there's potential for that, and I think that's. I look forward to the next season coming out and it being hype again. Because I was trying to release the first episode. In fact, my plan was to have 3 episodes ready when the TV series finished so I could bring it out then, and I just wasn't ready. So I was a little bit late on the train.
Right. Does that idea affect the way that you create? Like, do you find yourself explaining mechanics maybe more than you would otherwise with this non-gamer audience in mind?
I think I do. And I don't think that's something I intentionally thought of, but I do, from the very first episode on, I do start describing what Mythic is, what it is that I'm doing, how I'm interpreting these things. And then little bits and sprinkles of the game system as well, some of the rules in Fallout, that kind of stuff. And that's something else that my mate said. He said, I think, like, I don't want to sit down and be taught how to solo role play, but I feel like there's just enough in there that I understand what you're doing, and I feel like I could probably do it. But you're not interviewing me. I am interviewing you.
I want to. All right.
But I did want to ask, what was it like? So when you sat down there and you thought, it's COVID, I've got gear, there's no one doing this stuff, but it could be really cool.
Right. Yeah.
What was your experience starting to figure out how to play solo?
It was really an adventure. God, this is going to sound trite, but it was an adventure in itself to discover all of these writing tools and audio production tools too, as I went. Sometimes by fluking into something. I'll give you some examples. I was using a BX, like Basic Expert D&D, just really for the minimal rules. I didn't want to be explaining mechanics, and so I thought this is good for audio because it is rules light, and I didn't want to be doing too much crunch and too much dice rolling. Anyway, so I had a character in Season 1 who was a cleric, and if you use BX rules, clerics don't get their first spell until level 2. And so this cleric survived until 2nd level, and I had to think in the story, how would it make sense that this character suddenly could do miracles or whatever. Anyway, I had this bit of audio, and it had these musical, like it was quite a dynamic piece. So it would have these musical troughs, valleys, and lifts. And I had something with the script that I was reading, just by accident. It happened to mesh perfectly with the way the music kind of rose and fell, and it just kind of complemented the narration in a way that, if I had like tried to make that happen, it would have taken hours to engineer this. But just by luck of the way the audio file fell in time against my narration, the scoring was almost, it felt like it was custom made for this scene. And when I heard it back in my own audio system, I thought I actually could feel like an emotional response, which is odd to feel an emotional response to your own writing. Well, it's weird, but when I felt that was one of these moments of discovery where I was like, I think I might have something here that is like that is good. Could I recreate this moment? And sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. And certainly now I do a lot of my own scoring, and when I do my own scoring now, I try and insert dynamic moments, kind of hoping that I can recreate that phenomenon. And sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. So that's like one thing that I discovered, is that the marriage of music and narration, sometimes it can be more than just an accompaniment, something more than just masking a little bit of ambient noise because I don't have a proper soundproofed studio room here. It can serve this extra function.
Actually additive, yeah.
Really like adding serious emotional punch. Like it's not news that music can add an emotional punch, but I mean sometimes it can. You roll a 20 on that, and it just really, really sings properly. So that was one. And then a lot of these discoveries happened early on when I had no idea what I was doing. And along with the mistakes, there were some successes. Another one was I discovered, I could do a flashback. Like in a D&D game, I don't do a flashback. That's weird. But this isn't a D&D game. This is some other thing that I'm doing, and I could totally do a flashback. Obviously, I can't have a character die in a flashback, so I tend to like sort of put game and mechanics aside. But if I make a flashback and I keep it brief, I might be able to dovetail it with what's happening in the story. And I'm going to make something up now because I don't have an example at the ready, but let's say you have a thief and they're trying to pick a lock, and you're going to roll to see if they make it or not, and you roll and oh boy, they made it. Good, lucky us, they made it. And then I can switch to a flashback, and I could do a scene where the thief is being taught by their mentor how to pick this kind of lock, and it's not necessary. You don't need it. And in a game, that would never happen. But in an audio drama, it can add enough backstory to make things that happen procedurally. It makes them make more sense. Yeah. But it also adds dimension to characters, and you find yourself knowing the character so much better by doing that. There was another moment where I realized, not only can I do a flashback, I could do antagonist POV. I could do a whole scene just from antagonist POV. Again, in a D&D game, you would never do that. You would never say, okay, everyone turn your character sheets over. We're going to spend the next half hour seeing what the bad guy's up to. Ready? Like, that doesn't work. It wouldn't work. But in an audio drama, you could absolutely do that. And if you're careful, you can introduce dramatic irony, where now the audience knows that the bad guy's doing this, but the characters don't know that the bad guy's doing this. And that can be a superb tension builder. Yeah. And also add dimension to your NPCs. So instead of like the characters walk into a room, there's the bad guy. We don't know anything about them. We just know they're the bad guy. And then fight and win or fight and lose, but it's so much more interesting if we know who that person is in that room when the characters enter.
Yeah, and not only interesting from the listener audio drama perspective, but it's more interesting for you as the player, and that's what I'm finding as well. Like, doing it in this medium in this weird way, and you could do it without the audio drama. Like, I don't want people to think who are solo RPG curious is that in order to play, they need to create a massive, like just do 10 or 12 years general musicianship and audio experience and collect up lots of gear, and then you can start. I don't want to give that impression at all, but just that concept of, and I think what you said there is a really key point. You wouldn't do that at a table in D&D because it doesn't make sense in the context that everyone is going to be sitting there looking at you while you give this big backstory that they're not as invested in as you are, because it's your character, right?
Right.
But when you're alone, you can absolutely give all of the depth and detail and however much you want to put into that, you can do it.
You can.
Because no one else is there waiting for you to finish so they can have their turn.
Yeah. I think that's really important, the point that you're making there, because I get mail from people all the time asking questions about the show, characters, a certain mechanic, what did this mean when this happened? But often it's how do you do it? How do you role play? And do I need to keep some kind of record? And what is the best way to do that? I get those questions all the time. And ironically, I don't know that I'm the guy with the answer because I only do this. Yeah. The Tale of the Manticore is the only solo game I've ever played because it absolutely dominates my time. And so if I were to be playing a game on my own but without producing anything at all, what would I do for note keeping? I feel you have to have something. I do feel you have to have some record, whether it's point form notes or speaking into a voice memo. But I don't know because I only have the one experience of doing Manticore, and something about the production process. Maybe you'll be able to relate with this to this. During the production process of any given episode, I have to write it, then I record it, and then I have to mix it, and then I have to vet that mix and make some polishing changes. And by the time that episode is done, I've listened to it 7 or 8 times at least. And the byproduct is that I'm studying my own story. And so I have a better grasp of the fine details. And God knows I make a lot of mistakes and shouldn't, but I get the chance to hear that story a bunch of times, and so that maybe 5 episodes, 10 episodes down the road, I can do a callback because I've almost studied my own show just in the process of making the show. And so it opens doors if you can do that because as you're trying to interpret the dice, as you're trying to figure out what happens in your story, the more that you can create a feedback loop with earlier events or things you know about your character, being consistent with your character and knowing what would they do in a certain situation, I think you need to have that record of the game to make that possible, unless you have a crazy good memory. I don't have that.
Do you enjoy, like, you're talking about a lot of work there, right? You're talking about you would do if you were, doing anything, producing anything, any content with video or audio or something like that. It is inherently a lot of work, especially if you want something high production at the end of it. Do you enjoy that part of it, though?
Yes and no. I love seeing it come together, but I don't always like all the parts. I mentioned before that I go in with a razor and try and cut out tonsil noises. That's not fun. Nobody would want to do that. I suppose there's that sort of obsessive feel of, well, I'm making a better thing, but that actual work is not necessarily great. Recording vocals, it's fine. it's not fun, but it's kind of like when you're making some music. You might lay down a couple of tracks, and they just serve to build a bigger picture, and they may not be the most fun to play, but you know that they're adding something to the overall picture. So the fun for me is to see it come together. And when I can hit those magic moments where I can actually feel something, those are the super payoff. Like if I could create a fight scene and I know it's exciting, or if I could create a sad scene and actually can feel something inside, those are the moments where it's like, wow, it's a joy of creating art. But it's not always the joy of playing a game. It's a different thing. It really is more a joy of creation. I guess that's the best I can do to answer that question. That's a tough one. I don't know. What do you think about that one? Do you actually have fun with the game as a game, or do you do it because it's fun to make this thing?
Actually, both equally. And I think the main difference is the accidental method that I came up with, which I think is pretty different to yours, actually.
It is very different.
The method is that when I'm playing, I'm only playing. I'm not thinking about any of the narrative. Right. I'm not thinking about any of that. I just have the phone on the table and I'm just playing. And then I go later into writing mode. Yeah. And then I'm just writing. And then I go later into voiceover mode, and then later into mixing mode. And then I'm just sort of doing those things. And I did that completely accidentally. It's turning out to be a really interesting way to do it, because now I'm, as I've said before on some various shows I've been on now, talking about this, but I'm now like 20 episodes ahead of where I'm writing in the play, which means that thing that you were saying about that narrative being drawn out and dropping hints and stuff in the future, I can actually do that now by accident, because I am now ahead in the story, and I can add little extra bits in there that were developed organically, but now I have a little bit of that space and a little bit of that time for things to tick over in my head and sort of join things together that way. And for me, then it's really an experience of collaborating with my past self in a way. Like I have that feeling of collaboration.
That works.
Yeah. And so that was an accident. And I think that's the thing that allows me to for the production side of it, not to actually interfere with the gameplay side of it, which is a happy accident.
That is super cool. Yeah. I've often said to people that the first 10 episodes, or the first 10, I guess, play sessions in a way, they're often the toughest, because you have to just make everything up. Everything you're just pulling out of the air, or, using dice tables or whatever. But after that 10 episode mark or so, then you have a back catalog, like there's a history, and now you can draw on that to inform what happens later. And so I've always found that in season 1 and season 2, and I've just started season 3, it's the same. The first 10 episodes or so they're tougher to do, because you generate everything without context. But then after that, a feedback loop starts to happening, and all of those little points of information that you've just made up on the fly, often as a total aside. Oh, this person is from this far land, just because it felt like something you wanted to say. But then in episode 12, now suddenly it makes sense with something else, and you can put these two things together. But it takes a while to assemble enough data points so that you can draw lines between them.
Yeah. Tell me, I am interested, you've talked a lot about the production of your show. Could you tell, you've got a lot of fans out there. I'm also embarrassed and blown away that you can produce a bloody episode every week, and it takes me a month to do it. But so you're prolific in that regard, which is...
What the heck am I doing with my life?
Impressive. I don't know. It makes me think, what am I doing with mine? This is what I'd like to be doing. I'd like an episode every week. But tell your audience, you have a lot of fans out there, a lot of listeners. Could you give them, because you're not a YouTube channel, right? People don't see what you're doing. You are conveying the story and also conveying a sense of the gameplay through sound effects and dice and those kinds of things in there, and also adding some editor's notes or rather game master's notes as you go along, that kind of thing. What does your setup look like for your audience?
Are we talking my gaming setup or my tech setup?
While you're playing the actual game part of it, what are you doing? Do you have specific oracles? I mean, you said you wanted to keep a pretty rules-like system, but what does it look like?
Right. So, because when I got into the solo role-playing thing, I was completely ignorant. I didn't realize that there was a solo role-playing community, which is kind of an oxymoron.
Yeah.
But it's out there. I was not aware of that. I was not aware of Mythic. Too bad for me, because Mythic is genius. But I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know solo role-playing was a thing. I didn't realize that people did that other than this one podcast, The Iron Realm, which was really my only model for this. And as far as I knew, he was the only one in the world that was really doing it that way. So for me, the sort of the methodology is I'll open, like Google Docs or a Word document or whatever I happen to be using, and I'll imagine a scene as probably kind of DM brain first. I'll say like, okay, the setting is it's a farmstead, and then I'm going to roll up some characters really quickly. And with BXD&D, it really takes like minutes. You can do your 4 or 5 characters in just a few minutes because there's nothing. So I'll roll those up, and so now I've got these characters, and then my DM brain says, I need a conflict. The barn's on fire. I don't know. So I just by fiat, I'll just make something up. So could I use an oracle? I could, but often I just don't. I just do what a DM would do, and I just make it up. Yeah. And then I think, well, who are these characters, and how would they react? Are they brave? Are they cowardly? And then I'll start typing the story, right? Past tense, third person, sort of that omniscient view. And I'll start typing, and then I'll say, somebody wants to kind of get out of a dangerous situation. A flaming beam is going to drop. Okay, now I need dice. So I might decide, again, I could use an oracle. What's the chance that this beam is going to fall on my character? Or I could just make it up. And again, that's what I would do. I remember I came up with a luck mechanic when I started out, so that was one of my failures. It totally didn't work, but I tried.
It's fun to try.
Anyway. And so I'm going to roll against my luck, and they get hit by this flaming thing. How much damage? Now the dice come out again. So it really is just like a game, except for a couple of things. It's very, very slow because it's only as fast as I can type. And also, if a session of sort of gaming / typing lasts an hour and then I'm done for the day, then I'm going to spend the next 24 hours thinking about it. Oh, wow, that character, they got caught under a burning beam and they took 4 points of damage and they have 2 points left. What would happen next? And in a game, you would just sort of deal with it right now. And many events would take place in a single gaming session, whether it's 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever, like a table game. But for me, because I'm only playing for like an hour, because then I'm really sick of typing after that. And so now I'm going to go and think about that scene for a while. And so that's one of the things that makes solo role-playing and producing content very different from just gaming. Like, I do think it's a different thing, which is why I always feel a little under-equipped to answer people's questions about solo gaming, because it's not exactly what I'm doing. I'm solo gaming to make a product, but because of the way that you produce audio slowly, it just means that fewer things happen, and then I have so much time to think about what might happen next. In a game, I might say, somebody rushes and tries to pull that person out from under the flaming beam. But if I have 24 hours to think about it, I might come up with something smarter or more interesting, or something that can introduce irony or add some kind of artistic element to the story that I wouldn't have come up with on the fly because I'm not smart enough. I need all that time to think about it. And I don't know if you've come up with this yet in creating your show, but often my first ideas are not my best ideas. Like I have an idea of what should happen, and then a day, 2 days, a week later, I'll go, oh, how did I miss it? This other thing needs to happen, which is way more dramatic, way cooler.
Totally.
But without that time, I would never have thought of that.
Yeah.
So to do like slow gaming, there's advantages. I wonder if play-by-post people have noticed this phenomenon.
That is an interesting point.
I've never tried it, but I wonder if that is the appeal of play-by-post. Another thing that I've never done it, and I would have said, I don't really get how that would work. But I mean, obviously people do it and they like it. Maybe that's one of the appeals of that kind of gaming.
That is an interesting point. I'm conscious of time here, and you've got a Sunday to get along with. I'm ending mine over here. But tell me, do you have some little Easter egg or some little teaser or something that you could give for Tale of the Manticore in upcoming episodes to your listeners? Something.
Sure. So I'm between seasons right now. I just wrapped season 2. It was a controversial ending. I won't say more about it than that because I don't want to spoil anything. It was a controversial ending, and sort of as a amuse-bouche between seasons, I'm releasing a collaboration with the producer of Errant Adventures, Steve Morrison, and he and I thought, could we make like a 4-part miniseries where we do 2 players and Mythic GME, and we'll do the audio drama thing, but we'll also use elements of just gaming into a microphone. So kind of push the envelope on the boundaries of what semi-actual playing might look like. But that's not the teaser. The teaser is season 3 is coming in October, and I'm going to do a tonal shift because I've been living in a kind of a grimdark, urban, mostly setting, human-centric setting for the last 2 years with season 2. And so for season 3, I thought I'm going to change it up tonally and do something a little higher fantasy, a little less human-centric, and extremely like hex crawl, at least to begin with. And so it's going to be quite a dramatic shift tonally. Most of the mechanics are the same. The way the show works is mostly the same. I'm very much into taking risks, so I am going to introduce a couple of new mechanics. I'm introducing Mythic, like the Oracle. Finally, I'm so in love with Tana's creation. I think it's truly genius.
It is inspirational.
I want to say game changer, but it's so hokey. But I said it already. But I had to use it because I think it's so good. I'm abusing it actually a little bit. So for those of your listeners that know Mythic, usually you'd ask a question and then use that oracle to provide some answer that forces your brain in some direction it wouldn't normally go. But I'm abusing it, so I'm going to roll on her event meaning table, and then I'm going to store the result. I'm going to put on a shelf and wait until the moment for it to get used. And then when it does get used, I'll roll a new one, and then that goes like one in the chamber.
Interesting.
So it's an abuse of her system, but it's I can already feel its effect on the whole story because it makes me guide the narrative towards a thing that I might want to have happen in a way. It's going to sound railroady, but it's not. Anyway, so my teaser for season 3 is that it's a little higher fantasy, a little dark crystal maybe in its presentation. It's still for a mature audience. It's still going to be very violent, and in my intro I say there will be much pain ahead, and so that will still remain true. And also I should mention that for anybody that doesn't know my show but is kind of interested, season 1, season 2, and the upcoming season 3, they're all a fresh start. So you don't have to go. I'm kind of conscious of my listeners thinking, well, I'm kind of curious about this, but I don't want to have to go back and listen to 183 episodes to catch up. That seems like that's like looking at a novel like Pillars of the Earth and going, maybe later, maybe when I have more time. So I'm conscious of having like easy on-ramps, and so all of my seasons are easy on-ramps. And so one of those is coming up in October. Easy on-ramp for season 3. I guess watch this space.
Wonderful. Now, you mentioned the podcast Iron Realm and Errant Adventures. I'm going to put both of them in the podcast. Errant Adventures I literally discovered yesterday because a listener of this show reached out to me, as people have been doing, which is fantastic, saying, these are some of the content creators I like. I'd love to hear an interview with them, which is excellent for me because I'm discovering this other stuff now as well.
Can I lay some more on you?
Absolutely.
Because there's some good stuff happening out there. Legend of the Bones, Simon Williams. Awesome show, awesome guy. Definitely get in touch with Simon. I hope I don't leave anybody out here. Coop, the GM, does a show called Echoes of Eschaton, which I believe is on hiatus right now, but knowing Coop, I'm sure it's not done. And he's using the Genesis system, which is, I've never played it, but it's kind of a dice pool system, I believe. There's another one called Legends from the Fireside, another one called Stories from the First Watch, another one called Swords Against Madness. You got this recorded. So.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. No, I'm just thinking...
All of them are like a little bit different. Swords Against Madness it's almost like the heavy metal movie. It's sci-fi fantasy. A little bit gonzo, a little bit funny. So everybody has a different take on it. But they're all really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so much stuff out there that you just don't, you can't even comprehend. I can't comprehend how much stuff there is out there. I'm really looking forward to it.
There's actually a bit of a scene. There's actually a bit of a scene going on.
John, thank you so much for your time. Can you tell people where they can find your show and more? You have a blog as well, right?
Yeah. So the show is everywhere you get podcasts. It should be easy. Just search Tale, Tale, of the Manticore. It's a law. If you make a podcast, you must have a pun. You don't have a pun, and you're in breach of the law. And I'm sure I can actually hear the sirens. They're coming to get you.
Actually, in the Solo RolePlayers Podcast, and you're an English teacher, I am missing an apostrophe. So
there you go.
There's the crime.
So that's where you can find Tale of the Manticore, is just everywhere. I have a blog, taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com, which is really just where I put things like show notes and I got invited to Fan Expo recently, and so I put some photos of Fan Expo. Just sort of errata goes there. You can even listen to the show on YouTube. Only a handful of people do, but hey, it's there. So if you prefer to listen to shows on YouTube, you can find it there. And please check it out. And I would recommend. My listeners say this is not the case, but I would recommend starting with season 2 or season 3 if you want to wait a little bit. It's just a little bit more produced, a little bit more polished. If you want to hear me go through all the growing pains of learning how to do it, season 1. But it's a little rougher at the beginning because I have to figure out what the heck I'm doing. It takes a minute.
Thank you so much, John. It's been an absolute pleasure having you today.
Thank you, PJ, and I'm so glad I found your show. That's been a lot of fun lately to listen to you.
Thank you for joining us today on another episode of the Solo RolePlayers Podcast. You can find links to all of the excellent material that John talked about in this episode in the show notes, and over there you can also find all of the credits for the music and whatnot as well. Coming up on the show, I have an interview with Dan from the Dungeon Dive and an interview with Geek Gamer, which will be coming out in the next few weeks. And I also have some ideas for another one-shot actual play type episode, which I'll probably bring out on the next episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email over at soloroleplayerspodcast@gmail.com, or you can find me lurking around in the Solo Roleplayer Reddit threads. I'm PJ Sack. over there. And just a side note, thanks to everyone who's been getting in touch with me and giving suggestions for other interviews, games that you want to play. I put out a poll on Reddit recently about which actual play people would like to hear next, and it was pretty close between Dragonbane, Crown and Skull, and what was the third one? I think it was Heart, The City Beneath, which also looks really cool. And it was close, but Crown and Skull won out on that. So I'm currently looking into doing a playthrough of that, but we'll just see what happens. Do not hesitate to go over and listen to John's Tale of the Manticore. You can find that anywhere you get your podcasts. As John said, maybe start at season 2. Additionally, if you want to check out my other show, A Wasteland Story, where I do a similar but different kind of a thing, you can find that by searching A Wasteland Story into where you get your podcasts, or follow the link in the show notes. Thank you again, and I look forward to being back on this show in a couple of weeks. Bye.